let's read here in Matthew 26, starting in verses 1 through 16. It says, "And it came to pass when Yeshua had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, 'You know that after 2 days the Passover takes place, and the Son of Man is delivered up to be crucified.' Then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together to the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and took counsel together in order that they might seize Yeshua by subtlety and kill him. But they said, 'Not in the feast, that there should not be a tumult among the people.' But Yeshua, being in Bethany, in Shimon the leper's house, a woman having an alabaster flask of very precious ointment came to him and poured it out upon his head as he lay at table. But the disciples, seeing it, became indignant, saying, 'To what end was this waste? For this might have been sold for much and been given to the poor.' But Yeshua, knowing, said to them, 'Why do you trouble the woman? For she has wrought a good deed towards me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. For in pouring out this ointment on my body, she has done it for my burial. I am telling you the truth, wherever these glad tidings may be proclaimed in the whole world, that also which this woman has done shall be spoken of for a memorial of her.' Then one of the 12, who was called Yehuda Ishkariot, went to the chief priests and said, 'What are you willing to give me, that I would deliver him up to you?' And they appointed to him 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity that he might deliver him up." So here we have the drama surrounding the trial and execution of Yeshua is beginning right here. You note that he says, the Passover is coming in 2 days, and I'm going to be delivered up and crucified. You notice that they don't even say anything? It's just like they just kind of let that one go. What do you think of that? I mean, he has told them repeatedly that he is going to be crucified and killed and then raised from dead, and they've rebuked him. Peter rebuked him that one time, and they've otherwise not responded or not known how to respond. Do you think that they're still not getting it, or do you think that they're really starting to get it now, or what do you think of that?
I don't think they're getting it yet. I think they're getting closer.
I think they're hearing what he's saying. I just don't think they're quite understanding quite yet.
Well, and most of their conversations that are recorded in this book anyways are all metaphor. So are they assuming that maybe he's just talking about something else and I don't get it?
Yeah.
That's kind of what it seems like to me, is that they're just not quite getting it. Yeah, Keith?
Well, yeah, let's say you're with friends and you got a buddy that keeps saying, "Oh yeah, they're going to get me someday," because what, you're like, do you take them serious, or
Yeah, I feel you.
He said it several times.
Yeah, he's
like, okay, yeah, he keeps talking about they're out to get him.
Yeah.
And they know he's been having all these adversarial conversations with the religious leaders, and he knows that they all know he rubs them wrong. So now that he's stating that he's probably going to get crucified, they're like, yeah, if you keep pushing their buttons, however they're thinking about it.
Yeah, I have a feeling you're probably right, that they're just, maybe they're just thinking he's speaking a metaphor still or something, but they're obviously about to find out. You note, if you do a little bit of research on Caiaphas, this is kind of interesting. You know that Caiaphas is a really similar name to Cephas? Did you notice that? Yeah. And it made me wonder if maybe the translators knew that his name was Cephas, but translated it differently so as not to confuse us with Cephas Peter versus Cephas Caiaphas, the high priest. There's not a lot of historical information about Caiaphas. There is one really brief passage in the Sefer of the Talmud regarding the Passover from the first century, but it's really a kind of an obtuse reference. There's more discussion about Annas, which is apparently his father-in-law. But one thing that I noted is that Caiaphas was in power for almost 18 years. And that during this 120-year period that the Romans kind of ruled over that area, there were quite a few high priests, and they didn't usually last very long. You know, they might last 2 or 3 or 4 years, but Caiaphas was high priest for 18 years. What does that tell you?
He got along with the Romans well.
He got along with the Romans well.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I think that is the takeaway here, is that, and you know, why would that be important, do you think? What does that tell us about the spiritual leadership of that day?
No, I understand it. He bought his high priestship from the Romans. He was sold out to them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there seems to be, from the historical data that I was able to find, there's a lot of collusion and, you know, a little back scrubbing going on here between the Romans and the high priest's family of Annas. You know, Annas had 5 sons.
He bought a high priestship for all those, is my understanding.
Yeah, and it seems like Annas and Caiaphas, and you can see a little bit of weirdness going on in the 4 Gospels of, well, who's actually the high priest? And it seems like both of them were the high priest. That Annas was, in fact, the high priest, but had delegated some of his responsibilities to his son-in-law Caiaphas. And then his other 4 sons also became high priest after Caiaphas was dead, and after he himself, Annas, had died. So that family was around and in the high priesthood for some time, but it appears that Annas and Caiaphas were sharing this high priesthood, and they were in cahoots with the Romans pretty deep, especially noting that Caiaphas was in power for 18 years. That's a long time to be a collaborator. And, you know, I don't know if you have heard about that. I'm not saying necessarily that it was good or that you should watch or anything, but there was you remember Anne Rice,
Yeah.
the author who converted back to Catholicism, and she wrote that story about the young boy Jesus at 7 years of age. It's a totally historical fiction, but they did turn it into a movie. And the movie is it's fairly interesting in one regard, at least, and that is, I think that it did a pretty interesting job of characterizing first century Judea for the story. That there was constant battle going on because these zealots were fighting. There were rebels, doing guerrilla warfare against the Romans at all times. And it would eventually culminate in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, 100 years later. But it was really turbulent and difficult time. So there was a lot of collaboration between the Romans and these people who were in power. And I frankly think that there's a reason why you don't find almost any reference to any of these people in the Talmud or in the Zohar or in any of those Jewish writings, is because they recognize that these people were not a good example, and we don't want to memorialize them by writing anything down about them for posterity. You know what I'm saying? I think that they definitely recognize that these guys were just corrupt, absolutely corrupt. So now when this prisoner transport is about to be carried out, notice that they were, when he did eventually go and get the Yeshua in the Garden of Gethsemane, that they were taken. Where was he taken? Do you remember that? I mean, that's right in the next section here, but we haven't quite gotten to it yet. But just make note of, as we're reading forward, some of the things regarding this trial. I know that you've probably done some studies in the past about the trial of Jesus, but it'll be interesting, I think, to note what is going on with this trial in regards to the Torah and what the Torah says regarding the judgment, proper judgment And so keep your mind open to looking for those little details as we move forward. Now, do you notice something interesting about Simon the leper, and that Yeshua goes to Simon the leper's house? What's the problem there?
He's a leper?
Well, yeah. What's a leper doing living in a house in the city? You notice that's an issue? Now, you got two potential answers here. Grace?
He may have been one who had been a leper, and so everybody's notarized him
Right.
or called him the
Yeah.
leper, but Jesus had healed him.
Right. So there's that. That is one of the possibilities, that he was a former leper. Because if he, was actually unclean leper, he certainly couldn't live in the city. Keith?
Well, my translation actually says a man who had suffered from a skin disease.
Okay.
So they actually sort of point that out.
Okay. Yeah. So your translation has taken the tack of explaining for you in the most helpful way possible, how could this possibly be? And that is one option. One other option is that, there's a possible mistranslation there, because in Aramaic, gar-ba is leper and gar-abba is potter. There's one letter difference. So it could have been Simon the potter.
Isn't that just a vowel point?
Yeah, it's just a vowel point, really, in the Aramaic. So it's possibly a mistranslation, but it also could be, that he was one of the lepers that Yeshua had healed.
But that doesn't give anything in our Strong's thing for that.
For what?
Aramaic.
No, because your Strong's going to be keyed to the Greek.
It's going to be key to the Greek.
It's Greek.
Yeah. But remember that we're going off of the idea that it is very likely, or at least most probable, that the Gospel of Matthew was written in Hebrew or Aramaic, or in its original form.
Well, I think he would have been healed.
I think you could be right. You certainly could be right.
Also, too, in Mark, it had to be mistranslated there, too. Because
Says Simon the leper?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's most likely that he was a former leper, one of the ones that Yeshua had healed. So note how in one of the other Gospels, it actually talks about this. You can get yourself in a little bit of confusion here regarding this event, because one of the other Gospels, I think it's Mark, tells us about this event, but it happens, perhaps even years earlier.
Yeah, that's confusing.
It's like Simon the potter, and it's before any of this happens, and she puts it on his feet and not his head.
Right.
And it tells you that it's this spikenard, this certain fragrance. And then John has a little bit completely different spin on this.
What does he say?
I don't remember exactly, but it was her tears wiping his feet with her hair.
Oh, that's
So there's a little bit different, and I don't know whether this had happened a couple of different times, or if they're just pointing out different ways that they saw it or remembered it. I don't know. I don't know that it's necessarily a problem, but some people will have a problem with this because it appears to be different in each of those sections.
Well, it's different authors.
That's different authors, and it's entirely possible that they were trying to emphasize different things.
Was
But-
it the same woman who did?
No, it doesn't say necessarily. It doesn't identify the woman.
Sometimes it does. In John, it identifies Mary.
All right. Yeah.
Mm.
In John, it says it's 6 days before the Passover. In Matthew, it says it's 2 days before the Passover. There's this. There's almost. Were you gonna talk about the thought? Yeah, you go ahead.
You go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, you go.
No, you go.
You go.
All right, something there.
No, I have no idea what you're talking about. What are you talking about?
Oh, give me a break.
Tell me, what are you talking about?
That the different accounts are. You know what I'm talking about.
No, I
The
don't.
thing
We
we
just
talked about yesterday.
this.
I don't know what you're talking about. Just go ahead and spit it out, because I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I can't explain it. All I know
Remind me, I might know, but I don't know what you're talking about.
is that there's the time, if you look, it appears that there's an inconsistency in Scripture, that there's some things that are the same, like it was $300 and it was Mary, and it was, but one story she puts it on his feet, and one she puts it on his head, and one of them happens 6 days before Passover, one happens 2 days before Passover. And John, the story in John is like this conglomeration of both of them put together or something. And that what we would see as an inconsistency, like there's something wrong here, is actually, there's something there. If you look beyond just, oh, this doesn't jive. If you look underneath that, it's there's something about the head and the feet and the timing before and the after. And you're gonna have to finish because that's all I remember.
No, I think that's fine. It's just for you to point out that I don't. You know,
and
there
one,
are.
she has to approach it because the way he's sitting at the table, she has to approach him from behind, and in one she has to approach him from the front, and it's almost speaking to the way the bride approaches him before and after his death, because it's spikenard, which is a burial perfume. Right. And so John is telling this story. He's almost combining these two different events in a way that illustrates how the bride approaches the bridegroom before and after death.
So you think it is two different?
Put together in John to say something deeper.
Exactly.
Because John
And
is
you're supposed to
definitely.
notice the
Different times?
inconsistencies and go, why,
Yeah.
and look for it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I can't, I didn't.
Yeah, a lot of people say that you can only get a true understanding of the whole gospel if you read all four together and then indeed try to understand it from all
Yeah.
four different angles. From
I think
the
it's-
people,
yeah.
from the four
Right.
priests.
I think it's certainly helpful to do that, yeah. And I don't think that there really are any inconsistencies. I know there are downright errors in the translation. We've seen that many times. But for example, one time Matthew quotes and actually tells the reader that he's quoting from like Jeremiah, but it's not in Jeremiah. It's in Zechariah. That'll happen. I mean, that happens to all of us, right? I mean, I say, you remember what it says in the book of so-and-so, and you know what I'm talking about, and we all know the quote, but I just quoted the wrong book. That does happen.
I don't think God would have allowed that to happen.
I think there's a reason for it.
You think so?
I think every time there's something like that, it's like little flashing lights that you're supposed to notice, and there's a reason.
Okay, I'll take...
Because God inspired it.
I-
Also, too, I think it also shows the significance of the Torah and how it's not like that. You know, like, because they, throughout the years, made it, it's the same, but this is not. And I think that's a testament to what it is we're supposed to be measuring everything against.
Good point.
That's just my opinion.
No, I think that's
Also,
good.
too, I wanted to point out this Simon guy in Luke, if it's the same story, is a Pharisee.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one that was thinking in his head, why is this is sinner woman touching him, you know? And then
Yeah.
he says she's been forgiven much.
Yeah,
that
right,
whole thing.
right.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike?
Nah, that's right. We'll get to it.
Okay. Well, I think I think it will just do well to say, look, if you find something that you think sounds inconsistent between the three stories, that you can probably look at them all together and figure out there's something going on here. And I don't think it's an error necessarily.
It's
So
the same as the parables. If you had at one time a list of the four Gospels and the parables that they focus on, there is also interesting things, like a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
One leaves it out and the other one, John puts it in. There are
Yes.
7. And there are also
Yeah.
some significance. But
yeah, remember each author is either writing to a different audience or has a different point to make. I mean, I think that is lost on a lot of Bible readers, is that, you know, these guys are not just writing books because they're historians. They're not trying to write, I mean, all of the letters in the New Testament are not just, I'm deciding, hey, I want to write a letter to my friends over in Galatia, you know. No, that we're not just letter writing. It's not a letter writing campaign. You know, I have a specific issue that is going on over in that church that needs to be addressed. And that whole letter is written for that one purpose. And I remember learning this gosh, I was in my early 20s when I was starting to really get into, some heavy Bible study, and a Bible scholar that I really, really respected at the time, and I still do, told me, look, man, if you write an essay for your English class when you're in college, you got a point, don't you? I said, yeah, I have to have a point, and every argument in my paper has to support that point. He's like, well, the Bible does the exact same thing. Every author in the Bible has a point that he's making. And if you can figure out what is the point that this person is making, then everything in that book will point to that main argument that he's making. And as I began to study more deeply, I realized that is absolutely true. And so many problems can be solved by knowing what is the overall intent that this author is trying to make in the book. Grace, hold on.
And just having the understanding too is that we have 4 different gospels. Some have similar stories, some don't. But just like, and I heard it said, I thought was a really good example, is that just like you interview multiple witnesses if there's a crime committed, because you want to see somebody saw something that someone else didn't see. So maybe Luke saw her washing his feet with her hair, and Matthew saw the head, so it doesn't necessarily mean one's wrong.
And I think the key point there would be that we know that these are faithful witnesses, and that they're telling it truthfully. There may be subtle differences, but that can be attributed to a lot of different things. Grace?
Does it follow through what Angela was saying, that one has to do with before his death and the other after his death? Because we know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, one is the suffering servant, one is the king. One is the...
Yeah, right.
I'm drawing a blank.
Well, no, I know what you're saying.
Does that, so that the one that says it one way would be pointing the way?
Yeah, that's certainly possible.
I didn't look at it.
It's certainly possible.
But
I think that...
that's what made me think of that, is when you said that.
Well, Matthew supposedly represents the king, the head being anointed here.
Right.
Maybe.
It's good. It's good interesting.
Servant.
Servants. Yes.
And John is the feet.
John is the feet.
He's the servant.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Well, you know what? You notice, I think I think it was the Gospel of Luke that it tells us that how much was this costly perfume worth?
A year's wage?
How much?
A year's wage?
It was 300 shekels. Or 300 denarii. 300 denarii.
That's like $10,000.
Whoa.
Well, that remember the denarius is 1 day's wage.
So it's almost a year.
So that is almost a year's worth of wages. So that is an expensive perfume. And remember now, somebody did something interesting. And what about these pieces of silver that Yehuda from Ishkariot got from the high priest? Those are 30 shekels. You know the equivalency? Somebody did the exchange rate and said that the money that Yehuda got was about 100 denarii. So that was like he sold Yeshua for less than, or about a third of the cost of that bottle of spikenard, is what it says in the other gospel.
And that's probably a more important point than the argument about, hey, did that really happen 6 days ago or whatever? Right,
true. Yeah. You know what's interesting too, and I don't know if we spoke about this before. Do you know what Ishkariot is?
Men of cities.
Ish is man, and Kariot is a city.
It's plural. It's cities.
Well, you know what that word means? Strangling. Which is interesting, since he was strangled. He hung himself on a tree.
So that word cities means strangling?
I didn't hear that it was man of cities, but it was an actual city called Kariot.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Man of a city named Kariot. And Kariot apparently was in the Aramaic, possibly, or the Hebrew. I didn't look it up, but I thought it was a curious thing, and you can check it out. But it apparently means strangulation or something like that. I thought that's a weird thing. I actually I actually have some spikenard right here. And I'm going to pass it around. You can check it out.
It's really strong. You have to get it on your fingers.
It's really powerful
I got
stuff.
some on my fingers.
And the cat went crazy. The cat wanted it. She was like, it was like catnip, man. She really liked that stuff.
I'll have to get some.
Put it on the tip of her tail.
That would be fun.
So yeah, that's it's very interesting. It's a pungent aroma.
It smells like Boulder.
Smells like what?
Boulder, Colorado.
It smells like Boulder, Colorado.
It smells like
Like hippies.
Earthy
stuff.
stuff.
It's very earthy.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, to me it's like a
Like
forest.
hippies.
Yeah,
Like a horse?
a forest.
A forest. Oh, it's very earthy smelling. Yeah, it's very interesting. Tracy?
Strong's
And you said it's
H7152 is the word karyote.
Okay. And how did you find that? Did you translate it from the Greek?
No, I don't remember. I just have it in my notes.
Oh,
It
okay.
didn't mean anything.
It's karyote, and it means cities. It's a city in Moab, but it means like buildings or cities. It comes from the word kiryah, which means from the city,
Interesting.
flooring, building.
I'll have to check my sources.
Yeah, I was just gonna tell you in case you want to look it up.
I will.
7152.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
This race is right there.
It's not as bad as tea tree.
Oh, yeah. That's for opening your sinuses.
It's a very powerful ointment, and you can understand why it would be used as an embalming type of fluid for a dead person, because it's going to overpower a lot of stench. That'll take away the stench of death right
Yeah,
there.
right there.
Yeah, we don't even need to open it.
Yeah.
But if you put that in with a carrier, it might have been a very nice.
That's certainly
Well, it's not
possible,
been
yeah.
diffused. Have you diffused it?
No.
No.
She's not putting that in her diffuser.
What did you get it for?
It came as part of a biblical essential oils collection that I got.
Took the hyssop.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we got hyssop and myrrh and frankincense and
Nice.
spikenard and
The cat is weird about those smells.
yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
I didn't find it for months. I found
Oh,
it.
the Strong's
Doesn't
in the
smell.
Greek, if you go to Scariot, it takes you to H7149.
Which
That's
is
which is the singular, and then I'll take you to the. Anyways.
Okay.
You can just click on the.
okay. I'll check that out. Thank you. Now I'm going to move forward a little bit here. Did anybody have anything else to point out in this section?
Just that in I don't know, lost my place. In when he says, "For you always have the poor with you."
Yeah, I had made some notes in that regard. What do you got?
Well, I just thought it might be connected somehow to Deuteronomy 15:11, where it says, "For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide unto your brother, to the poor, and to the needy in the land." And this whole chapter is about the Shemitah year.
Yeah.
The Shemitah year.
Yeah, I know. I looked at that this week, and I heard some very interesting things and read some interesting notes in the Talmud regarding, according to Jewish interpretation, or however you want to look at it, a person who is poor because they violated the Shemitah year. That somehow they were in violation of the command, and that becoming poor or destitute in some way was punishment for violating the Shemitah year. Which it could be. I don't know. Grace?
So why is it in the Torah tells us that we're supposed to take care of the poor?
See, I think that the Torah has so many instructions regarding work and being blessed by God and taking care of your brothers who are in need. Frankly, there shouldn't be any poor at all. Do you agree? I mean, if you're looking at the Torah and its instructions regarding the blessings and how to make sure that you're being blessed by God, and how if someone for some reason becomes poor, that they have kinsman redeemers and such. It's frankly a little bit of a puzzling commentary coming straight out of Deuteronomy there. It's like the poor you're going to have with you always. It's like, why? Why would that be? If you're following the instructions and you're taking care of your brothers and sisters, you shouldn't have the poor with you.
If they're poor because they sinned, then it wouldn't be because of something like your husband died, or
Right.
you became an orphan, or
Right?
there was terrible illness and you couldn't work, or whatever.
Right.
So that would be understandable that God says take care of them, but if God is dealing with them,
Exactly. And so I think that's more a commentary than a prescription. Is that I know who you are and I know how things work, and I'm telling you, you're going to have poor with you always. And
Because he knows
Yeshua,
you're not going to take care of them.
yeah, we still don't.
Yep.
We still
Big
don't.
time.
but the point isn't that they're going to be always poor with you. The point is take care of your poor when I'm not here, but I'm here right now. So focus here.
Yeah.
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 Otherwise, why would it be all in one sentence right there?
True. That's a good point.
I was just wondering, totally off base maybe, but if because of where this is placed in Deuteronomy, it's like if it's a chiasm, it's the center of it. It's right in the middle, and the rest of it's about a Shemitah year.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering if there's some kind of indication as to when this is taking place. Like maybe this is a Shemitah year. I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting thought.
Well, it certainly would be interesting for Yeshua to die on a Shemitah year, the year of release. I mean, that would be...
If the Son makes you free, you shall be
You'd
free.
be free indeed, absolutely.
So it's
Yeah.
interesting.
But was the Jubilee, was that so?
Yeah.
We don't have any real... There's nothing that we can find in any of the ancient writings. Jerry?
When they divvied up the land there in the very beginning, didn't every family got a certain amount of land, I guess based on how many kids they had or whatever?
Yeah?
If they had to sell that land during the 50-year period or whatever, when the year of Jubilee came back, they would have all got their land back. They would have all been debt free. So if there was poverty, like you said, it was mismanagement
Right.
of one's goods.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can also read
How would you
about
say
it.
it?
You can read about the same thing in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah when they had all these slaves, and he was like really upset with them and saying, "You're supposed to free your slaves. You've had these slaves for way longer than 6 years." And they said, "Oh yeah, we've sinned," and they repented and released their slaves. And then what happened? They took them
again.
right back. They enslaved them again. So, yeah, they have not been good about that. And you know that when they went away to the Babylonian captivity for 70 years, that was because they hadn't let the land rest during the Shemitah year. So we have not ever been good at taking care of, I mean, we're still not today, frankly. I don't believe.
I think we're worse than ever.
I agree. Absolutely. Tracy?
Also, interestingly,
Money,
if
money.
you think about the fact that he knew it was in their hearts, he knew that they were going to sell it for the poor. It was a selfish thing, the scriptures tell us.
Yeah, you know what? It does say the disciples became indignant, but we know who had control of the money
And I
box.
think some of the other accounts actually say that, and I don't know, it seems to be a money thing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And you know how it can be too when people get to helping the poor. You can use that as a badge of honor instead of doing it in anonymity and, helping people, not letting your left hand know what your right hand is doing. It's like we're going to shout it from the hilltops and you put my name on a plaque in your building when I go and help and stuff like that. So, yeah, it makes me think that they wanted a little bit, hey man, this is a lot of money. We could get out and get, money to the poor and get a little notoriety for ourselves for helping the poor here.
This one kind of makes it a hard argument just because it says his disciples, but I think one of the other ones that's talking about Judas specifically.
Yeah, it does. In the book of John, it says specifically that Judas had a problem with it because he was a thief and he had control of the money bag. I'm like, why would Yeshua allow Judas to be in charge of the money bag if he's a thief?
For God's will to be done on earth.
For God's will to be done, yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting thing. You know, there's an interesting note in the in regards to the spikenard in the Zohar, which I thought was kind of interesting. This is in Sonsino Zohar Bereshit, section 1, page 56b. It says, "While the king was still with his company at table, my spikenard sent forth its fragrance." And that's from the Song of Solomon. It says, "This verse," he said, "can be expounded as referring to the ways of God. When God sees that a man who cleaves to him and with whom he abides will one day degenerate, he takes him from the world prematurely, culling, as it were, the odor while it is still sweet. Hence it is written, while the king was with his company, my spikenard gave up its scent. The king is God, the company is the good man who cleaves to him and walks in his ways. The spikenard indicates the good deeds on account of which he is removed from the world before his time." I thought that was a rather curious little commentary on the Song of Solomon that so seems to really clearly point to the Messiah in a metaphor using spikenard. I thought that was kind of curious.
When was that written?
The Zohar was written about, parts of it were written before Yeshua's time and parts of it were codified and written down after. It's a very ancient document. Very interesting, though. I just thought it was kind of curious regarding spikenard.
Has nothing to do with, what is that, Zoharism or...
Zoroastrianism?
Yeah,
No, that's a Persian mystery cult. Yeah.
So this is more like
The
Jewish also?
The
or-
Zohar is a Jewish mysticism type of writing that is a really heavily, like the Book of John is like incredibly spiritual and has just deep spiritual meaning, and the Book of the Revelation is got just deep spiritual meaning and lots of symbolism. The Zohar is deep spiritual, full of symbolism, explaining deep mysteries of the text. So, yeah. Moving on, now we're coming to the actual Passover, and here I have just a couple of demonstration, a little bit of illustrations for you, which I think was kind of interesting. And I know here is Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper compared and contrasted against, that's a Roman family, obviously, but that is how it happens, and I'm sure you've probably seen something like this before. They did not sit at a table.
That was for a photograph.
That was for a photograph. They were posing for a photograph. No, but so you're usually sitting on the ground or on a small cushion or maybe a bed of straw with a tapestry or something over it, leaning on your left side and eating with your right hand. And it's like, if you're laying this way and another guy next to you and you just kind of go around this U-shaped table. Here, this kind of illustrates something a little bit different. This would have been a small party of only a few people, eating around a center table. But according to the biblical tradition, it's a U-shaped table with people all the way around it, and the servants can go up into the U and serve. And that's how you can explain some of the things that happen in the gospel, where John leans back against the breast of Yeshua and says, "Lord, who are you talking about?" And he's like, "The one that I'm dipping this stuff in." It's like, that's why. And that's just interesting too. There was a guy on YouTube a little while back, and I don't remember who he was, and maybe one of you that was sent it to me, I don't remember, but there was a guy who did a ton of research on this and came up with some really interesting stuff and about the seating arrangement. And did you see that, Mike?
It was Keith.
Was it Keith? Okay. Yeah, that was really neat about the guy who did all that research was talking about, they were seated like this, and this is probably the order, and the guy that's seated on either side of Yeshua is like a high place of honor. So he had the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, sitting to his right, and Judas sitting right next to him.
To his left.
Right to his left, which is interesting. Especially in comparison to the Gospel of Matthew, Harry keeps comparing the right and the left, and you've got the right hand being the spiritual, the left hand being the physical, or the fleshly.
On their left and eating with their right too.
That's true. That's right. So it's kind of interesting, Keith.
If you see that picture there, how the guy on the left end would be leaning in onto Yeshua's chest because John would lay on him.
Right.
On
Right.
his bosom.
So it's likely that in our, if you want to kind of picture this from the Last Supper or the Passover that they were holding, this would be John, the apostle. This would be Yeshua. This would be Judas, and then on down to where very likely Peter was at the end, at the very end.
Why?
I can't remember exactly, but the guy that did all that research had a really good case to make for how Peter was closest to John, but not close enough because he was sitting there, but because he was around the U-shaped part of the table and could speak to John to ask him, who is he talking about? And then he leans back on the breast to ask Yeshua, who is he talking about? And Yeshua then goes through the dipping ceremony of the Passover Seder. So I just wanted to show you this. It was kind of interesting, just to get a little bit of insight before we jump into the actual Passover thing that they're doing here. Or is it? Is somebody at the door? Now in Matthew 26, 17 through 30, here's what we have there. Now on the first of unleavened, the disciples came to Yeshua, saying, where shall we prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he said, go into the city unto such a one, and say to him, the teacher says, my time is near. I will keep the Passover in your house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Yeshua had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. And when the evening was come, he lay down at the table with the 12. And as they were eating, he said, I am telling you the truth. One of you shall deliver me up. And being exceedingly grieved, they began to say to him, each of them, is it me? But he, answering, said, he that dips his hand with me in the dish, he it is who shall deliver me up. The Son of Man goes indeed, according as it is written concerning him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is delivered up. It were good for him if that man had not been born. And Yeshua, who delivered him up, answering, said, is it I, Rabbi? And he says to him, you have spoken. And as they were eating, Yeshua, having taken the bread and made a blessing, broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, take, eat, this is my body. And having taken the cup and making a blessing, he gave it to them, saying, drink all of it, for this is my blood, that of the covenant, that is shed for many, for remission of sins. But I say to you that I will not drink at all henceforth of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in the kingdom of my Father. And having sung the Hallel, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Now this section generates a tremendous amount of discussion and frankly quite a bit of controversy. So I don't want to be controversial. However, no, I'm not going to be controversial. Now it's interesting that right at the very beginning it says on the first of unleavened. Now some of your translations may say on the first day of unleavened bread. Does anyone have a translation that says on the first day of unleavened bread? Yes? What do you think about that?
I think that it's a mistranslation. And I don't think that's first, I think it's before.
Yes, I agree. So now Mike, what is that? Yeah, a lot of the Bibles will say on the first day of unleavened bread. First of all, the word day is, if it's there at all, it's probably italicized. That means it's not in the text. So that you can look at this and you can actually translate this right back to the Exodus, the book of the Exodus. And it tells you that the Roshon, which is not the first day, but before the first day. This is not the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or they're already late. Because you know that there's Passover in the evening, from translating from the 14th to the 15th. That would be the first day of unleavened bread, is the 15th. But if they're saying the first day of unleavened bread came, and all of a sudden they're saying, hey, let's prepare the Passover, well, then they're a day late. Tracy?
It can also be translated, and it is translated, this word for first as before.
Right.
So, and it tells them to go prepare the Passover. So it's like the clearing of the leaven. Get
Yes.
the leaven out of the place and let's
Right.
go there.
So that was an easy one. If you can see pretty clearly that there's a little bit of a, they stuck that in there because they didn't quite know what to do with it. It's like on the first day of unleavened bread. No, it's not the first day of unleavened bread. It's the day in preparation for the day of unleavened bread.
It doesn't even say day, by the way. It says before the unleavened bread. There is no day in there.
Right,
Right.
right. So some translations are going to be a little wonky. It looks like yours is pretty, got it straightened
That's
out.
what it's straight Greek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the straight Greek, it makes perfect sense, but when you translate it into English, they'll screw it up for you.
You gotta remember at this time in 1611, when this was translated, they knew nothing
About the
Hebrew
Passover?
rules, about any of that stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
They've been dead for 800 years.
Yeah, that's a good, Jerry, that is a
They have no
delightful
idea
point
what
that
they
you
were
have
talking
made.
about.
That is an excellent point that you've made. In fact, in 1611, I took a whole huge course. It was an entire semester on British history. And if my history lessons served me correctly, they had expelled all Jews from England for a period of several hundred years during that time. So that's a good point, Jerry. When we're translating these Greek and Hebrew scriptures into English for our King James Bible, they know almost nothing about Jews and how they did things and how the whole culture of this thing. It's been really lost at that point. I mean, it was from the late 1400s that they had expelled the Jews from most of Western Europe and England and Spain, Portugal. So that's an interesting insight, Jerry. Thank you for that. Now, so the time frame here is not that they are on the first day of unleavened bread. This is before the first day of unleavened bread, and this is the day of preparation. This is the day when you actually remove the leaven from the home. The lamb you've had with you for several days, you examining it. You would then take it to the temple. During this time, you would take that to the temple. They would slaughter it, send you back home with your lamb that is prepared so that you can cook it up once the sun goes down and it has become the 15th day. That would be the day of transition, for the day of freedom, that celebrates the exodus from slavery in Egypt. And so, one of the key challenges that you're going to find here that people are fighting over and they were fighting over it in these days, as far as I have been able to understand from my own studies, is did Yeshua actually hold a Passover Seder or did he have a Last Supper? Now, you guys may hold different opinions amongst yourselves and done research on it, and some of you will be diehard and ready to die on that sword to say this was a Passover Seder. And others will say, no, this is not likely a Passover Seder. This is a Last Supper or some kind of commemorative meal. Well, all I can say is a few things. I will say a few things, and you can take it for what it's worth. And I'm sure you have your opinions, and I probably won't sway you. But here's the thing. There are so many parallels in this meal that they're having in all four of the Gospels and in the book of Corinthians where Paul talks about it, that it would be very unusual for for Yeshua to say, I will keep the Passover in your house with my disciples. To have all of these allusions to what has been in a Passover Seder for thousands of years, so many similarities to what's going on during a Passover Seder happening in the narrative account, that it would be rather unusual, kind of weird for him to say, we're going to hold a Passover Seder, because you can see the challenge here. How can you hold a Passover and be a Passover sacrifice at the same time?
Yeah, and also he said in the beginning, what we read in 25 or 26:1, it came to pass that basically he says there are 2 days before the Passover.
Mm-hmm.
So
Now, we don't know how much time passed between when he was, apparently something happened during that time, because here we got Judas Iscariot, who is going to make an agreement with the high priest to change some money for him. He's getting his head anointed with oil by this woman. And then now it's telling us clearly those 2 days have passed, And now we're on the eve of the Passover. We're on the eve of the 14th. Now I know that you've probably also heard in your research that in this day there was a disagreement between the Sadducees and the Pharisees about when the Passover was. Have you heard of that? You can actually read about that. Now, you know, of course, that the Sadducees lost that argument, and they are no longer in existence. That Pharisees in this day has become the modern day rabbi Judaism kind of things. The Pharisees lost, especially since they were the high priests and were in charge of the temple. The Romans destroyed the temple in AD 68 to 70, and we don't have a high priesthood anymore. There's no place for them to serve. And their philosophy is basically gone. Unless you want to say the Karaites would be a real close iteration of the Pharisees, or the Sadducees, excuse me. So the point I'm making here is we're not going to settle this necessarily, because much better Bible scholars than I am, or anybody that I know of, and I've heard lots of very good arguments to say this is a Passover. And I've heard a few good arguments to say it's not.
John, what do you have in verse 18? Can you read that?
18. And he said, wait, I have to. One second. This one. 18 says, he said, go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. At your house I will keep the Passover with disciples, or my disciples.
What does yours say?
I've got, the teacher says my time is near. To you I will prepare the Passover with my disciples. I don't have.
To you.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Keith, what did you want to say?
I was
And
looking
it says
at,
prepare, not.
it's,
Right.
this is a common belief, and I don't know if this can be researched real quick on verse 26. What's the word they use for bread when Yeshua took the bread? I was told it was arton, which is leavened bread.
Oh, yeah.
And that, if that's true, this is before.
So if breaking would be a figure of speech.
Well, arton is leavened bread.
So yeah, I'm just saying breaking is not
But
like.
at the same time, I've heard that you don't have to get the leaven out until the day after Passover. That's when the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts.
Oh, so their matzah is something that was carried off later, unleavened bread matzah?
Can I?
Please.
As in children.
You know, we still have problems every year when we're trying to schedule the Passover. We have problems with this. And I'm thinking this lack of clarity about it is so that he could hold a Passover and be a Passover. Remember last week when we talked about you have these two things that seem opposed, like you have to choose one or the other. But the way not to get wrapped around the axle is to grab a hold of both and move forward. Because if you try to latch onto one, that's when that tangle happens.
Yeah.
And so I think with this, it's just one of those things where we have to kind of.
Well, I mean, there's clearly some Passover symbolism going on here. There's no question about it. And yes, it is a historical fact, and you can look it up, that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had a difference of opinion about when the Passover was.
I thought that you had to go to the Temple Mount to slaughter the lamb
Mm-hmm.
for the Passover.
Mm-hmm.
They would not do that the day before. The
That's
night
right.
Before.
That's right.
So,
Now
if
remember
there's no
who has
lamb for the Passover,
remember.
how can it be a Passover?
Okay, so remember who has control of the temple?
Sadducees.
What's
The
it?
Sadducees, not the
Sadducees,
Pharisees.
yeah, Levites.
Right. So if Yeshua, let's say that for the sake of discussion, I'm just throwing this out there, that Yeshua observes the Passover with the Pharisees and believes that they are correct, that it is on the 14th and not the 15th. So he holds a Passover observance with his disciples on the 14th, and then is crucified in the temple when the Sadducees are actually slaughtering the lambs for their Passover. Now, how does that work? I don't know. But that's one possibility. That's one theory that I have heard put forth. Now, how can they get their lamb slaughtered if they can't go to the temple and have the Sadducees aren't going to slaughter lambs on the 14th? Angela?
It's a Thanksgiving offering. They'll slaughter that anytime.
That's true. That's true.
You don't, it's a Thanksgiving offering. That's what the Passover lamb is. And those can happen any day of the year.
Good point. Okay. Ani?
I just think with this thought that Yeshua kept the real day. I don't think he kept like 2 days because the Pharisees believe it's one day, the Sadducees believe it's the other day. I think what happened there is so significant, and it did happen on the right day. He got crucified as the Passover lamb on Passover.
So he was not eating a Passover.
I don't think so.
Okay.
And I think to that point, they had to bring him off the cross before the Shabbat, right? And I don't think that was a Saturday Shabbat. I think that was a feast of
That was the high Shabbat.
It has to be because of the order of the spices. Buying the spices after and preparing the spices before.
Right.
So the only way that makes sense in my mind is that they had to take him down before the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which means he was on the cross on the 14th.
Yeah, there's some interesting conundrums here. And I've even heard people say that this guy, they go into the city and there's a guy that's carrying a water pitcher on his head. Have you noticed that in one of the other Gospels, that this guy is carrying a pitcher of water on his head? Did you notice what?
You have to follow this guy?
Yeah, find this guy that's in the city who's carrying a pitcher of water on his head.
Yeah.
Do you know what's odd about that? Men did not carry water on their heads, except for one particular group, which was the Essenes, which they have a completely different calendar. They do not use.
Because they had to only they could only go in the city where there are no signs on the outside and.
Yeah, they would reject the temple service altogether. Right. They thought the temple was completely corrupted. Now they could have certainly been in the city of Jerusalem, and this is apparently taking place in the city of Jerusalem. Yeah. But that's what some people have supposed, is that this guy who's carrying a pot of water on his head is actually an Essene, and they have a solar calendar. They use Enoch's solar calendar and not a lunar calendar of moon phase cycles.
Where is that coming from, that they carry water on their heads?
You can read about that in the Qumran documents. They didn't have women among them. And so they didn't have hardly any women in the Qumran community. It was mostly all men. And so they carried their own stuff.
So no way to carry the water pots, they had to just carry it.
Yeah. They had to do it for themselves because they didn't have a woman. Yes, that's one way to look at it. Now, note, of course, in the meal that Yeshua is making a blessing. So he takes the cup and he says what?
This is mine.
Says
I turn this into blood. No. No, it says, okay, as Yeshua took the bread and he blessed, and he broke it and gave it to disciples and then said some stuff. And then he took the cup and he made another blessing and then handed it around to them. So what are these blessings? Keith, sorry.
Those are blessings that they've been doing for thousands of years.
That is correct.
Right in the line.
I say it each week. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, Borei pri hagafen min haaretz. Blessed are you, the Lord our God, who brings forth bread from the earth and who brings forth the fruit of the vine. That's called making a baraka. And so he does that for each of these things. Now, the bread that Yeshua is breaking, of course, people who see this as a Passover Seder will make this the afikomen. In fact, you can look in the Dedelich Hebrew Gospels, and it'll actually say he broke the afikomen. So they're definitely, some of your translations will relate it to a Passover. And Franz Delitzsch certainly did.
By the way, I also like that he, in a previous, did we read it last week or 2 weeks ago, when he says the 7 times, I'm the bread, statement.
Yes.
So he kind of foreshadows that.
Yeah.
And he talks also about
Right.
I'm the blood. And
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. So as far as, him breaking the bread and giving it to him, I think that you can see some symbolism here for a Passover Seder if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But I think that there's, you could go either way with that. And many people do. But I want to focus a little bit on the symbolism of what he's talking about with the bread and the wine. I think that's really important stuff. Now, he says first, take and eat, this is my body. Okay, so he's talking about the bread. And we know also from the book of John that he's given these really hard sayings that people tripped over and couldn't follow him anymore, is because he says, anybody who eats my flesh, my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. And he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood, and they were like, this is a hard saying, who can listen to this guy? And they all went away. They couldn't follow him anymore because he was talking some crazy stuff. But what do you believe and what do you think about the symbolism here of Yeshua saying, this is my blood and this is my body? What is he talking about? In what sense is that true, Tracy?
Well, I think this is a direct connect to Jeremiah 31 to 33,
Regarding
when
the-
Yahweh says, behold, I will make a new covenant with them. Where else do we hear this new covenant in the New Testament but here?
Now, do you note, however, that this actually does not say new covenant?
Mine says it is.
The word new is not in the Greek.
Mine is.
Do you see the word new in the Greek?
Yeah. Look at this. Yeah. It's G2537.
What does it say?
It says kanos of uncertain. It says of uncertain affinity, new, freshness, new. It's the same word he used with "Behold, I make all things new" and new wine. All those it's used all over the place.
Okay, so this is him actually addressing the new covenant.
And that's why I think we know the bread is the word, right? We all say we at least seem to agree on that, right? That the bread is the word of God.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, this also ties into Jeremiah 31 because he says he will write the Torah on the hearts and minds. This is the new covenant. I will write my Torah on the hearts and the minds. That's one thing. The next thing is I will remember their sin no more. And that's what he says here. My blood is poured out for forgiveness of sins. And then the next thing is, and they will no longer teach one another, for they all shall know me. Well, that's all over the place regarding the Spirit after this new covenant, that you need no man teach you because the anointing you receive will teach you. So I think that makes up what this new covenant is. And I think that's what he's symbolizing here.
Okay.
And it's also really interesting, too, is that this word fruit is not the same fruit that he says, go and bear fruit, or even I'm the vine and you are the branches, go and bear fruit, or you will know them by their fruit. It's not the same word fruit. It's the word offspring or generation. So there's something to that.
More like a seed.
He is the vine, so he says, I will not drink the fruit of the vine after this. I will not drink the offspring or generation of the vine after this until that day when I drink it with you. So I think it has something to do with his word, his seed, him knowing you, and you producing fruit. But it's got something to do with the generation of his children. Like we were talking about with woe to those who are pregnant.
Yeah.
That whole symbolism.
Right.
Maybe you're producing the wrong kind of offspring. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good insight. That's
I know
good
there's
insight.
new covenant in there as well. New, it's not in mine here.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that from the Greek?
Yes.
That's weird.
You don't have it?
Because his Greek translation does not have the word new. Mine doesn't either.
So weird.
Now, I was looking at the Apostles' English Polyglot. Now, I don't know what Greek translation you're looking at, but maybe certain Greek translations have it and others don't. That is certainly possible.
I've got this interlinear hear
Well,
that
it is.
on my phone.
It is. Well, you know what that makes me think of course, is, looking at Exodus 24. Look at Exodus chapter 24.
Do you guys have the Greek 2537 for a different word maybe, or is it just not in there at all?
It's not in there at all.
It's really weird.
Mm-hmm. So check this out. In Exodus chapter 24, starting, let's say, in verse 6, Moshe took half of the blood of these slaughterings that they did and put it in bases, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the slaughtering place. And then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of all the people. And they said, all that Yeshua has spoken we shall do and obey. And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, see the blood of the covenant which Yeshua has made with you concerning all these words. So here we have a direct correlation where Moshe says, behold the blood of the covenant. And Yeshua here says, this is the blood, this is my blood, the blood of the covenant. Yes?
This is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right?
Maybe.
Coming right up. What I'm saying is, when Christ says, this is my body, this is my blood, one of the things that they had to do was get rid of all the unleavened bread.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying my blood and my body has no leaven. It's perfect, it's pure, it's righteous, holy.
Sure.
And when I shed it, your sins can be forgiven.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the new covenant.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I think they
So
kind of
how
go together.
would you relate these two things happening in Exodus, where Moses reads the book of the covenant to the people, and they say, everything that Yeshua has spoken, we will do and hear, which is a little odd because it sounds backwards to me. You're supposed to hear it and then do it. They say, we will do it and then hear it. And then he sprinkles the blood on them and says, behold the blood of the covenant. Now Yeshua is, I believe, making an allusion to that. But he's not sprinkling them with blood. He's doing what? He's having them put it inside them, not sprinkle it on them. He's putting it inside them. Tracy?
That makes sense because, again, what you're talking about is the Torah and the blood, right? And the new covenant in Jeremiah 31, the Torah and the blood and the Spirit now.
Yes.
See, and when you said do it and hear it is key because they would have to do it in order to understand it. They couldn't understand it. It's Messiah's Spirit that is in us through this, his blood, this new covenant in us, that allows the Spirit to teach us so that we can understand it.
Totally agree.
And it's not the covenant in the day when I took you by your hand,
Right.
but this time it's going to be in here.
Inside you.
It's
Yes.
the same. It's not a different covenant.
Absolutely.
I believe it's Romans 10:9. It says, if you confess with your mouth, which is a covenant, you are making a covenant with God,
Yeah.
and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead,
Mm-hmm.
thou shalt be saved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that is a blood, basically a blood covenant.
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
blood of Christ. If you break that covenant, you're going to get the curses.
And I think he's about to make a blood covenant with them
Yeah.
and cover them with his blood. And he's using this symbolism of the Passover to teach a fuller meaning about that. And now I think it would behoove us to make a comparison between the Passover. I mean, thinking about the blood and the body of the Passover lamb. Okay, what did he do with the blood of the Passover lamb? On the door. You put it on the door. What's that for? Who's going to see that? What's the purpose of that blood? It's a sign to who? To God, that he should do what?
Pass you over.
Pass you over from death into life.
Right.
What is the body of the lamb for? You eat it. For what?
Energy.
substance.
So you can have strength to walk out of Egypt, to get out of slavery.
Oh, it's not sins.
Well, slavery is sin. So now take that metaphor a little bit further and say, okay, if the blood on the door is a symbol to God to have him pass over our transgressions and not kill us, then Yeshua's blood is the same thing. It's a sign to God that he is to pass over you. Your sins have been made a covering, an atonement, or removing altogether. Okay, and you feed on his body to give you the strength to walk out of slavery. Do you see there's symbolism from both directions, from the Torah, from the Passover, from this here. It's all tied together, I think, in a wonderful little package. You could just put a bow on, and it'd be great.
And that Shemitah section I was talking about earlier is the same one with the ear and the door.
Yes.
Too, so I don't know if that's
I
connected to this,
totally
but it
think
seems
that.
like it is.
I think it's totally connected. Absolutely.
What was the Deuteronomy scripture?
24, Deuteronomy 24, around verse 8.
Okay.
So let me ask you this: looking at this chapter here, verse 24, and you might this will be interesting if you look at this in the Greek. It says, "The Son of Man goes indeed according as it is written concerning him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is delivered up. It were good for him if that man had not been born." Now, there's something a little bit weird about this translation, and frankly, if you look at it in the Greek, what do you notice at the end part of that verse? Who is it talking about? Who would it be good for who had not been born? Who are we talking about? What is your understanding of that? It would have been better for who? It would have been better for Judas if who had not been born? If Judas had not been born. Okay. Now what does your Greek say?
Might be if Christ had not been born.
Actually, what your Greek text says is kind of interesting. And every translation from every gospel wherein this quote comes from has it wrong. It literally says, it would have been better for Yeshua if Judas had not been born.
Oh, for sure. That's interesting.
It would have been better for Yeshua if Judas had not been born. Not it would have been better for Judas if Judas had not been born. Mm-hmm. Now, what difference does that make?
How can that be? Earlier
I'm
in the
not
verse,
saying.
it's talking about that man, referring to Judas,
Yep.
and then if that man,
Yeah, well, see, if you go to the Greek latter part of this sentence in Greek, it doesn't say that man.
You're saying the translations are all misleading.
All of the translations are wrong. The translations, the Greek actually says it would have been better for him if that man had not been born.
Oh, that makes
And it
sense.
previously tells you that that man is Judas.
But why would it have been better for Yeshua? Because the plan was set long time ago.
And I
that
don't
he
I
had
don't
to
propose
die.
to know
So that's
why.
for me the thing, if it hadn't been Judas, it had been
I totally
something-
understand. And I'm
something
not
else.
proposing to know why it's doing that. I'm just noting that that is actually a mistranslation, and it doesn't say that it would have been better for Judas if Judas had not been born. It says it would have been better for Yeshua if Judas had not been born. It's just
for
a,
that man, right?
yeah.
So whoever translated probably had the same opinion. That doesn't make sense. Let me.
That's possible.
There's a mistake here.
Yeah, Angela, what are your thoughts?
It would have been better for Yeshua if he hadn't been born. But Yeshua was here to do what was best for him.
Right.
He was selfless.
Right.
Good point.
It was better for us that Judas was born, but it was not better for Yeshua that he was born.
So now
He's
what?
still willing to give himself up.
So if you take it in the mistranslated way and say it would have been better for Judas if Judas had not been born,
it's still true.
well, okay, that's certainly possible. Yeah, I mean, you could say it would have been better if Judas had never been born. Yeah, better for Judas or better for Yeshua? I don't know. So you gotta make some theological judgments regarding Judas. Now, I know that you're going to say, and most people would, Judas is the devil. He's going to hell. He's going to burn in hell for eternity, and he's a man of lawlessness, and he's a man of sin. And you know what? You're going to have to really, that you're making a judgment based upon a couple of things, and I don't know that I'm willing to make that judgment, but most people would. They'd have no problem just putting the hammer down and saying Judas is in hell burning forever because he was an unbeliever. That's a judgment that I'm not willing to make. I'm not saying Judas is a saved person, and I'm not saying he's in hell burning, but I'm saying that's quite a...
He was in enough inner turmoil to take his own life.
We do. We do. We also know that he took money to sell the innocent with a bribe. We also know that he tried to give the money back.
I have two things to say.
Only two?
About that. Well, we'll see. About if it is true that it was better for Messiah, could be because he's the one that has to judge, and that he has to place that judgment, and wrath has to be poured out. So that's not something he wants to do.
That's a good point.
However, this is also Greek, and perhaps the Hebrew doesn't translate as well, if indeed it was in Hebrew, because that is a Hebrewism, if that's a word. When they would say in Job, "If I wish I'd never been born. It'd be better if I'd never been born."
Curse the knees that brought me forth.
Yeah, so that is something that they would say. So it could just be a translational thing too.
That could be. And maybe the people who translate it were smarter than me.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. But I think right after that, in verse 25, then Judas, who was betraying him, answered and said, "Rabbi, is it I?" So, in some ways, it could make sense too that if they are talking, referring to Judas, because they're talking about the person who betrayed me. So if you go before that, it says they're talking about the person that betrays him, and then he says that. So if you kind of read it all in that context, I think that it does make sense to say, okay, well, it probably is Judas that is saying,
Do you think that Judas is being sincere when he says, "Is it I"? Do you notice in the book of John that when he dipped the morsel, Satan entered into him at that moment? It's kind of interesting.
It is all preordained. It is all played out from beginning.
It's very interesting. Yeah, then there's some hard theological questions there, and I just wanted to, touch on a couple of them, but I'd not obviously go too deep.
I think it's also interesting again that when he dips that bread, totally in the beginning, the 40 days of temptation, when the devil comes to him, visit him, and he talks about, hey, just make that stone into a piece of bread.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this also, when you look at the original covenant with Abraham, right? There was a sacrifice there that was made.
Right.
And right before that took place, there was this same bread and wine ceremony with Melchizedek.
Yes. Right. Absolutely. Good point.
I think too, there's a lot of symbolism with wine representing blood, especially in the prophets. You see people talking about being crushed like grapes.
Yeah.
And that verse that says that he was
crushed for our iniquity.
Crushed for our iniquities. Yeah.
In Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a clear-cut correlation that is made all over the place. I couldn't agree more, and I think nobody would disagree with that. I want to ask you about this. How is verse 28 and, take my blood and stuff, how is that related to communion? Communion. Where does the Bible talk about communion?
Right here. Right here. Am I crazy?
No, I'm just asking. I mean, where does the Bible talk about communion?
It doesn't.
You are correct.
And the word communion?
Yeah, the concept or the word communion, it doesn't.
Communion is Passover at.
Yeah.
Every Sunday.
Or the first of every month. First Sunday of every month.
Yeah, you're going to have different interpretations about that. Now, see, the thing is that the word communion, the idea of communion, simply does not exist in the Bible at all. So why do people drink a little grape juice and have a little square cracker once a week or something? Do what in remembrance of him?
To eat it and drink it in remembrance.
Eat and drink what?
The body and the blood. Those are completely metaphorical symbols of the body and the blood.
What are we doing here?
What are we doing?
Yeah, what is
Eating the word, letting it.
Okay, so are we having, is this a Passover or not?
What we're reading? Or what are we doing?
What we're just reading here. I will keep the Passover in your house, and they prepared the Passover.
I don't think it is.
Truly, I have desired to eat this Passover with you. So this is not a Passover.
I don't think so. I think it's a final supper.
You did, wait, Robert, you haven't said anything at all. You,
17 it says it's a Passover. I mean, come on. I mean,
But
The
then,
thing is
Do you
that-
disagree with him?
John,
Yeah, but even if I said before, I don't think he did the actual Passover dinner Seder with them. I truly think it is related to the Passover, obviously.
Yeah.
It's not just a random.
okay, so when he says, do this in remembrance of me, he's saying whenever you eat or drink, or whenever you hold a Passover, whenever you observe this
I think
festival.
it's whenever you do a Passover.
I think that these were common elements in bread
What was common element?
and wine.
Oh, so anytime you're drinking bread or
You
eating...
should remember what I did. Remember this.
Okay,
Oh.
so anytime you're eating bread and drinking wine, you can remember it.
Sure. Why not?
I
Okay.
think if we understand
What
it
if
from
you
the
don't
great
eat bread?
perspective, it makes more sense because that's
They
what
didn't
they
have
did.
gluten
Their meals,
problems back
especially on Shabbat.
Wait.
I think we're common. We're making it very simple. This is something very special that God said to do, a commandment, right? People call it commandments. This is what God said to do. I wouldn't say anytime we eat a cracker, we remember what God
I
did.
think we have to be careful. I think we have to be careful about calling
Okay,
this
hold
a
on.
new command, though.
I didn't call it new.
So, it was. So you're saying this is a
Passover is a commandment.
Oh, Passover.
I'm saying what he said, do this in remembrance of me. That's not a symbol. That's not symbolism. It says do it, right?
Do it. Yeah, it's a command.
Yeah.
And you don't believe that you think that was a pre-existing command
I'm not sure.
From the
I'm
Torah.
not sure what you're talking
from the
Yeah, I
Torah.
thought
That's a
he
Torah.
You mean
a
to-
Torah command.
What, to
Because
do
the
what?
Messiah is not going to give us a new command, right? He's not
I'm
giving
not
us
sure what it
new.
Wait, no,
commandments.
he's asking you, what are you talking about? The command to do the Passover or the command to eat bread and drink wine?
That's why you're saying to eat the bread.
I think
is
Robert's
a
talking about
command, right?
Passover. The
Well,
Passover's
He said
command.
no.
I'm talking about what God said to do. He said this, do this in remembrance of me.
He said, when you do it in remembrance
Well,
of
when
me.
you do it, meaning to do it, right? I mean, this is something that I believe that we need to continually do this to keep it in remembrance.
Right,
Because the
Okay.
Passover, he fulfilled that, right?
right.
It's been fulfilled.
Sure.
So we're going to remember this. It's not something we have to do for something to come in the future, right?
Sure. Okay. So the key question then comes, is he talking about when you observe the Passover, remember that this is not just your exodus from slavery in Egypt, this is your exodus from slavery into sin, and remember you can attach new significance, the ultimate significance, the fulfillment of the prophetic shadow pictures from all the way back is now brought to fulfillment, and when you observe Passover, it has a whole new meaning.
Yeah.
But this is not talking about do this as often as you want. And I mean, not that you couldn't, but that's not what he's talking about. Is that a fair characterization of what you're saying? Okay, that's fine. I just want to hear where you're coming from. It sounds like Mike has a slightly different opinion, and that's totally cool, man. That's allowed here. Angela?
I think the church understood the significance behind Passover and these acts and that idea. And so they incorporated it, but there was that pressure not to look Jewish, and so it ended up looking like communion instead. And that's why there's that correlation between the two, but that they're different and time different.
That's a good observation. Sure, if you're trying to strip away anything Jewish from your religious practice and you still know that Christ commanded to do this in remembrance of me and you're not going to do a Passover because that looks Jewish, well then you're going to make up something new and call it a communion. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Mike?
I just, maybe I'm misunderstanding what is being said, but
By whom?
several.
By him, me, or him?
Several people in
Oh, okay.
conversation now say a new command.
Where
Did
is?
the Messiah make any new commands?
I don't think Robert was saying that.
You just said it.
What?
New command.
Where?
Just in this last sentence.
I did?
Before you said Mike had a different opinion. You said that this was a new command. And I heard Robert say new command.
Really?
No, he didn't say new covenant.
I don't know that I would call this a new command, and I don't know if I did. If I did, I apologize.
He said a new meaning to Passover, meaning you keep doing something that was already established in Torah, but it has a new meaning now. It has a fulfilled meaning now with what Yeshua did.
Okay.
That's where the new
That makes sense. Tracy, go ahead.
Well, like you had mentioned before, what was he doing? And you told us these Hebrew prayers that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have the Hebrew understanding, this is something that they did all the time. Maybe this is what he's talking about. Every time you do these prayers and you bless the bread and the wine, do it for me.
That's an interesting insight.
Not necessarily about Passover, although it can certainly be related, but I think it might be more related to these Hebraic things.
That's an interesting insight. And then Tammy is going to bring in something from 1 Corinthians, which may help shed some light on this. So where are you at in 1 Corinthians?
I'm at 1 Corinthians 11:23.
Let us turn there real quick. 1 Corinthians 11:23.
Till 26.
So you can read it, Alan. but-
Okay. Okay, so would you say 23?
Yeah, it goes down quite a ways.
Okay. For I received from the Master that which I also delivered to you, that the Master Yeshua, in the night in which he was delivered up, took bread, and having given thanks, he broke it and said, "Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way also the cup, after supper, saying, "This cup is the renewed covenant in my blood. As often as you drink it, do this in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the death of the Master until he comes. So that whoever should eat this bread or drink this cup of the Master unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Master. Let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For the one who is eating and drinking unworthily eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the body of the Master. Because of this, many are weak and sick among you, and many have even died. For if we were to examine ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the Master, that we should not be condemned with the world. So then, my brothers, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. And if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, lest you come together for judgment. And the rest I shall set in order when I come.
By the way, before we start on this, it says here in Greek, new covenant.
Yes, I did notice that.
You
Yeah, Paul is clearly, if Yeshua didn't, Paul certainly is, going back to Jeremiah 31:31 and saying this is the new covenant. So Paul seems to be giving some instructions about these people eating, whether it was a Passover or a supper, just a love. Some of your Bibles might even have a little heading that says the love celebration or the love feast or something like that. That says that these people are just getting together for table fellowship, which is certainly possible. But they're apparently seeming to be doing it in an unworthy manner, which they're incurring judgment to themselves, and that's a whole different topic. Keith?
You even said, as you read that, it said, for as often as you do them.
Uh-huh.
So, That's not alluding to it's an annual thing.
Yeah, it seems to not be in that instance. Or perhaps they had interpreted it that way and had begun to do it that way in the city of Corinth, and he was correcting them. Not because they were doing it at the wrong time necessarily, or too many times, but they were doing it in the wrong way.
Their intention.
Yeah.
Their hearts weren't aligned, and they were doing it, and they needed to align their hearts.
Yeah, you know, there's an interesting thing that you might want to think about, and I don't think we'll have time to go into it this evening, but how do you eat and drink in an unworthy manner? And what does it mean to examine yourself, and how would you relate that to the Torah? That is a key question.
I think you have to examine yourself for pure thought and pure motivation, and that you should come to honor his sacrifice, certainly not with anger in your heart towards your fellow man, or sin that you won't acknowledge, that kind of thing.
Okay.
That's what I always try to do.
Yeah,
myself.
and that's a real common understanding about that has been attached to communion. It's like, you know, don't do this in an unworthy manner. And of course, all my life in church, it was like, you better make sure you don't have any, you know, unacknowledged sin or, you know, something like that, eating and drinking in an unworthy manner. I would simply say this, and then we'll move forward. Look at the commands in the Torah regarding the eating of a Passover, and what instructions does it have about examining oneself in regards to a Passover? Who may eat of a Passover? Right. Got to be circumcised. And remember, no, I'm not going to go into that, but just think about that and look at that and the relationship between what Paul is talking about here in 1 Corinthians and eating and drinking in an unworthy manner, and what the Torah says about eating and drinking in an unworthy manner, and who is even eligible to eat of a Passover, regardless of whether or not he's talking about a Passover. Okay, so that's it for that. But it's not likely to be, you know, that we're going to fix this. But, you know, if you want to say this is just something that you do during Passover, and you say, hey, I'm going to remember that this unleavened bread that I'm eating, reminds me of the body of Yeshua, and the wine that I'm drinking in the Passover meal is reminding me of the blood of Messiah, fabulous. That's great. If you want to say, hey, every time I'm getting together and having bread and wine, I'm remembering can you remember it too much? No, I'm not going to say that. Would it be a violation? Would it be a sin to remember, you know, the sacrifice that Yeshua made every day for no reason at all? Absolutely. So I don't think there's anything like that going on here. And I think that it's open enough to interpretation to say, hey, whenever you're eating and drinking stuff, give thanks to God, and, you know, if it happens to be bread and wine, then it has a special symbolism, and I'm totally cool with that. If you want to say, you know, this is specifically talking about Passover, that's fine too. That's fine too. I don't think it's clear enough for us to say this is a commandment or something.
What if it's saying every Shabbat?
Some people believe that, yeah, absolutely, because when you are ushering in the Shabbat, or you're, you know, ushering out the Shabbat, you know, at the end, they say these same blessings and, you know, break bread and wine. And most Jewish families who are at least observant will do that. And so, yeah, you do that every Shabbat, which is also kind of interesting that it's happening on Shabbat, you know, a rest period. And that makes sense that it would happen every week in that case. So, yeah, that makes sense to me.
So are we ever going to do that here? I asked John.
A communion? Yeah. Well, if we did, it would not be a small square cracker and a glass of grape juice. Mm-hmm. You could have grape juice if you didn't want alcohol, but I think if we were to, break a loaf of bread, like people do, when they're bringing in the Shabbat and saying the blessings over the bread. I mean, that's something that a lot of Messianic fellowships do. They'll take challah and break it and say the blessing like Yeshua said, and they'll, do the wine. I mean, Michael Rood does that every week. No, he doesn't use unleavened bread. But, is that something... Now, the thing is that you kind of would... How would you do that exactly? And I'm just asking. I mean, if we were to... I wouldn't call it communion, necessarily. If we were to break bread...
Break bread together in fellowship and service.
Remember the resurrection.
Okay, so what does that mean? That we're going to hold on to our juice and hold on to our piece of bread, and we're going to sit here and look down at the floor for a couple minutes? And examine our hearts and make sure that we don't have any sin inside of us before we eat this stuff? Is that what we're going to do?
Good question.
I'm afraid to ask Robert.
Yes. And 2 minutes is not long enough.
Thank you, Robert. All right, Audie, what do you got?
I'll let you know when you're done.
Hey, Robert.
Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
I think we should look into this, as I also believe there's a lot of pagan traditions that have been mixed into that. Like, I know for sure the way the Catholic Church does things, that has a lot to do with some paganism also.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also not sure. I know the wine and bread with Melchizedek, but I'm not sure with this Shabbat tradition of the Jews where that really comes from. So I know that we always assume the Jews they don't have too much paganism involved, but the more I learn, the more I also realize that they do have a lot of pagan stuff. So that's why I would suggest really kind of to. I don't have an opinion on this, and the scripture's pretty vague on that too.
Sure.
So whenever you eat or drink it, what does that mean? Whenever I do Passover, does it mean some other occasions? And there's not much in the Old Testament really in the Torah except Melchizedek.
Well, I think that the traditions of the Jews in breaking bread, it definitely goes back to Melchizedek. It also goes back to Abraham entertaining the 3 angels. If you read in the Talmud and the Mishnah regarding that, that is why they do the breaking of bread and the drinking of wine on Shabbat, and that is specifically because of those 2 passages with Abraham entertaining the 3 men, angels, God, coming to visit his tent, and also because of Melchizedek. Those specifically those 2 reasons is why they have inaugurated that tradition.
Does it mean I do it for every Shabbat in a way? Because I know with Abraham that was a one-time visitation. I don't even know. I don't have the scripture exactly in my mind. I don't know if they cooked food or if it was really a bread and wine.
Well, they definitely attach kingdom significance to that because of God visiting man with Abraham at his tent, and also because of Melchizedek, which is a kingly priest kingdom type of thing. So they know about the significance of Melchizedek, and they definitely attach deep significance to Melchizedek. And they also attach deep significance to the angels coming and visiting, God visiting a man in his tent, the tabernacle kind of Sukkot kind of thing. So that is why, and they attach it to the day of rest, which is maybe symbolic to them of the 7th millennium of rest under the Messiah. So that's why they attach it to that. And I don't know if you want to say, I feel uncomfortable with that. Maybe they got that from somewhere else. No, I totally understand. And I don't know, frankly, how you would do that. I mean, people just. That's why you have some Christian churches like we're doing that every Sunday, some like we're doing it the first Sunday of every month, some we're doing every couple of weeks, and whenever we feel like it. I don't know. It's totally open to interpretation. It's as often as you do it. And I don't know when that is and how you want to do it. Angela and then Grace. Are you sure?
Well, the paganism thing, I think I've said this before, that Hasatan is a thief.
Mm.
And anything that is significant to the kingdom and to God, he will steal.
That's true.
And corrupt.
True.
But he will have to pay it back. And so that's why you find so much of our stuff incorporated into pagan practices, because he's a thief.
Yeah.
He's taking it, he's trying to make it so that
Well, he hasn't
he's trying to take
invented
it away
anything
from us.
except a
I don't
lie.
think we should let him.
That's a fair point. It's a fair point. Who else? Gracie?
I just think that, and this may have some holes in it, I don't know, but I think that when you consider that before Jesus died and rose again, we didn't have his Holy Spirit until the day of Pentecost. But for the rest of us, from the moment we've accepted Christ as our Savior, we have his indwelling Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think an awful lot of the point, not all the point I'm sure, but for what we're talking about here, of the wine and the bread, is an opportunity to consciously examine ourselves in our fellowship with the Father.
Mm.
And let the Holy Spirit shine a light into our hearts, because we don't see ourselves as God sees us.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is no way that you can keep short accounts with the Lord too much.
Sure.
Because I can walk away from my quiet time with the Lord and something snap and I lose my temper.
Yeah.
Or I have a bad attitude.
Yeah.
Or I have a hateful thought. You know what I mean?
Jerry tells us about it all the time.
You probably could.
I'm
But-
kidding.
So I think that it doesn't matter. I don't think that God is so interested in how often we do it, or even knowing our hearts how we do it. So long
Just as long as we do it.
we do it.
Yeah.
Because he's more interested in our fellowship with him.
And he says,
is
you know,
in
there are.
how we do it.
Yeah.
If we do it to the best of our ability and obedience,
Sure.
then he's gonna bless us for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm just, for me personally, doing some type of a commemorative memorial ceremony with some bread and wine just feels so weird to me, having done it in the church where you're holding on to a little piece of cracker and a little tiny cup of grape juice, looking at the ground for 5 minutes, wondering, am I worthy to drink this and eat this, you know? And to me, that just feels really weird.
I consider it just like a ritual of tradition.
And yes, and it is.
It's an opportunity to do the ritual and like take yourself there, take yourself back to that.
Sure. And I would not.
All of them use a little tiny square cracker box.
That's true. No, the Catholics have a good-sized round wafer.
The
So
have a big old loaf of bread.
So and I would not.
Oh.
And I hope that I have not. Let me just go ahead and say this, and we'll wrap up right here. I just want to say that I hope that I haven't offended you regarding communion, because I'm not saying communion is a bad thing. I'm just simply saying that it now that I have come to understand that Passover is actually something for me, and to be able to celebrate that with the significance of Yeshua attached to it, it's a wonderful thing. And when I'm breaking that matzah and I'm drinking those cups of wine at the Passover festival, that just holds so much new meaning to me, and it's a very comfortable thing. It fits like a glove. But for me, now that I've got that I had lost for so many thousands of years through my father's kicking that to the curb, it would be weird for me to go back to holding a piece of bread and a little bit of juice in my hand and looking at the floor. It just would feel strange to me. And because that's what we always did in church. It was like, the organist is playing some somber type of stuff, and everybody's holding on to it, and there's a moment of silence, and you're supposed to be thinking about your sins, or that's what you see. But that goes directly against what Yeshua said. Do this in remembrance of me. But see, when I was doing it, and we're all sitting here, we're not thinking about Jesus. We're thinking about ourselves. What, am I worthy to drink this? Am I worthy to eat this? I'm examining myself. I'm not remembering Jesus. It may be for the last couple of seconds before the guy says, okay, let's all partake of it. I'm like, oh, Jesus, thank you, I don't know. It just feels weird to me. And I apologize if I'm offending you. I really am. I don't want to offend you. I'm just saying...
You missed out on the blessing that the Lord has given me with it.
What's that?
I said, I'm just sorry that you missed out on the blessings that the Lord gave me with it.
With
Maybe
communion?
I was taught different.
That is certainly possible. That is certainly possible.
Seriously.
And in my church, you had already examined yourself before you showed up on Sunday morning.
Most usually.
That was preparation.
Maybe it is something that I went through when I would...
I'm just
Oh, I wasn't
saying.
Catholic. No, but
No?
No. I wasn't Catholic.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe it was just the way I was raised and the way they did it was just weird to me. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just guilty. Who knows? I had a guilty conscience. Anyway, yes, sir.
One thing I think for, when we leave this flesh behind and, when we finally meet our maker, then I don't think he'll say, well, wait a second, you started then doing that communion exactly how it was and how you interpret it. Yes, it was still wrong, but you did it. Now you're not going to the kingdom.
Right.
I think what we're doing now is communion, for
What we're doing right now.
Yeah.
maybe we can do more study about it, but I feel this is totally communion. And
That's a good point.
even though the word is not in there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. I like
And
that.
if you consider too the spiritual aspect of it, eating the bread, eating the word, remember me when you do this.
Sure. Yeah.
So even spiritually, that's how we understand the scriptures is
Sure.
through Messiah. If
Good
we don't
point.
have him, we're wearing a veil.
Yeah. Really has nothing to do with actual bread and wine. That's a good point too. Cool. Excellent. Well, I hope we haven't stepped on too many toes this evening, but it was good discussion anyway. Let's pray and we'll break bread and drink wine.